The train car rattled, a metallic scream echoing across the cold, vast plains of Texas in late 1944. Inside, the air hung heavy and stale, thick with the scent of fear, unwashed uniforms, and the faint, acrid tang of coal smoke clinging to every surface. These weren't ordinary travelers. They were German women, soldiers, auxiliaries, now prisoners of war. Their journey across the Atlantic a blur of discomfort, uncertainty, and often sheer terror. They had been rounded up, processed, and shipped, often with little ceremony, some reporting treatment that felt less like organized capture and more like being brutally dragged across continents, jostled in overcrowded transport, stripped of dignity. Yet, for many, the shock of arrival wasn't merely the sight of barbed wire fences or the stern faces of their American guards, but something else entirely, something utterly unexpected that would redefine their understanding of their captors, blurring the stark lines of wartime enmity. Before we delve into this stark contrast, help us understand how these stories resonate today. Where are you watching from? Your perspective helps us bridge history. Imagine the scene. Exhausted, disoriented, their faces grimy with travel, these women stepped onto American soil. Their boots, worn and scuffed, crunched on the gravel paths of Camp Hearn, Texas, a temporary world carved out of the scrubland. The crisp autumn air, so different from the humid battlefields of Europe, bit at their exposed skin. They expected harsh retribution, perhaps the cold indifference of an enemy. Nazi propaganda had painted a grim picture of Allied cruelty, a narrative designed to steel their resolve, but what they received, in many instances, defied every expectation, every indoctrinated fear. A warm meal, a clean cot, even a moment of quiet. How could such a brutal, dehumanizing journey culminate in such bewilderingly humane treatment? And what strategic purpose could possibly lie behind offering comfort, even a small, unexpected slice of American culture, to enemy combatants when animosity ran so deep? This intricate tapestry of wartime humanity and strategic calculation unfolded throughout U.S. internment camps, a complex dance between protocol and pragmatism. Captain Eleanor Vance, a no-nonsense U.S. Army provost marshal officer, oversaw the processing of thousands of these women across various camps. Her gaze, sharp and observant, missed little. She had witnessed the fear in their eyes, the defiance etched on their faces, and sometimes the quiet despair that war leaves behind. Her meticulously filed reports, now preserved within the National Archives, spoke volumes about the logistical nightmares of wartime transport, the hurried movements, the cramped conditions, the sheer scale of moving enemy personnel across oceans and continents. The dragging was, in many cases, the harsh reality of wartime exigency, not necessarily an act of intentional malice, but a consequence of total war. Yet, her reports also hinted at a deeper, more complex strategy at play, one that transcended mere custody. Consider the account of Liesl Schmidt, a young German auxiliary, recorded in her smuggled diary entries from Camp Ruston, Louisiana, dated January 1945. She described the initial terror of being herded onto a train, the guttural shouts of guards, the constant fear. "We were animals," she wrote, "pushed and pulled, no thought of our person." But then, a few days into her American captivity, a detail emerged that shattered her preconceived notions. A soft light filtered through the mess hall windows, illuminating steam rising from plates. The air, usually thick with the scent of institutional food, carried something else, something sweet and spiced. It was a dessert, a golden wedge of pumpkin pie, served by an American cook with a surprisingly gentle hand. This simple gesture, so utterly out of place amidst the brutal realities of war, left her, and many like her, profoundly bewildered. Anya Sharma, the historian specializing in World War II POW experiences at Harvard University, notes that such instances were not isolated anomalies, but often part of a larger, deliberate design. How did the U.S. military reconcile the harsh realities of wartime transport with such unexpected gestures of humanity? And what strategic purpose could possibly lie behind offering comfort, even a small slice of American culture, to enemy combatants? The answer is buried deep within declassified intelligence reports and strategic memos from the War Department, reveals a calculated, often audacious approach. It wasn't merely about humanitarianism, though that played a role. It was a sophisticated tactic in psychological warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. O'Connell, a lead intelligence officer stationed at the Pentagon in 1943, articulated this vision in a confidential directive. Humane treatment is not weakness, but a potent instrument. By undermining enemy propaganda regarding Allied barbarity, we open avenues for intelligence and influence. The ink on his memo, now faded to sepia, outlined a program designed to chip away at the rigid ideological walls built by the Third Reich. Imagine the stark contrast. German propaganda had relentlessly portrayed Americans as brutal, uncultured barbarians intent on total destruction. Yet, here were their captured women, not tortured, but offered a slice of pumpkin pie. A symbol of American domesticity and Thanksgiving, a holiday utterly foreign to them. This dissonance, a quiet hum in the mess halls and barracks, began to erode the foundations of their indoctrination. The smell of freshly baked bread, a rare luxury in war-torn Europe, often permeated the air in the camp kitchens, a constant subtle counter-narrative to the tales of starvation and cruelty. But how exactly did this subtle psychological strategy translate into actionable intelligence, and what other unexpected elements were introduced into their captivity? Beyond the mess hall, the strategy extended into the very fabric of camp life. In Camp Concordia, Kansas, by mid-1944, a formal education program was underway, spearheaded by American civilian educators. Dr. Martha Jenkins, a former high school teacher from Topeka, volunteered to teach English and American history to German POWs. Her classroom, a repurposed barrack, still smelled faintly of pine disinfectant, but the chalk dust on the blackboard and the quiet rustle of paper from the textbooks brought a semblance of normalcy. They arrived expecting to be lectured on their failures, Dr. Jenkins noted in her personal correspondence from October 1944, but we offered them a chance to learn, to question, to see a different world. Over 300 female prisoners participated in these voluntary classes, a number that quietly surprised military officials. This wasn't just about goodwill. The War Department believed that educated, less ideologically rigid prisoners would be more willing to share information and more receptive to democratic ideals upon repatriation. Letters sent by prisoners, though heavily censored, often contained subtle hints of these unexpected conditions, providing a crucial, if indirect, intelligence stream about internal camp morale and individual shifts in perspective. These were not just statistics, they were lives being subtly reshaped. If you find these hidden layers of history as compelling as we do, consider subscribing to Whispers from WW2. Your support allows us to unearth more untold stories and bring these nuanced perspectives to light, offering a deeper understanding of the past. A daily routine in camps like Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, where many female auxiliaries were held, became a carefully constructed balance. While the barbed wire fences and armed guards were ever present, reminding them of their status, the hours between reveille and lights out were often filled with purposeful activities. There were opportunities for craft work, sewing, and even gardening. The soft earth beneath their hands in the camp garden, tending to rows of vegetables, offered a therapeutic escape from the grim reality of their situation. Major General Walter L. Weibel, then commanding the Army Service Forces, issued directives in early 1945 emphasizing productive engagement over mere incarceration, a policy aimed at maintaining morale and preventing ideological stagnation. This wasn't a luxury, it was a calculated investment. These programs, however benign they seemed, were also designed to subtly gather intelligence. Interrogation sessions, often conducted by female officers like Captain Vance, were not always confrontational. Over a cup of lukewarm coffee, in a room where the ticking of a wall clock was the loudest sound, conversations would drift from family to pre-war life, from hopes to fears. The goal was to build rapport, to find cracks in the Nazi narrative, and to identify individuals who might be receptive to providing more substantial information. The meticulous reports from these sessions, cross-referenced with censored letters and observations from camp personnel, painted a detailed picture of German society and military organization. But how deeply did these carefully crafted environments truly penetrate the prisoners' ingrained beliefs? And what impact did they have on their eventual return to a shattered homeland? The sheer logistical challenge of managing thousands of female POWs across dozens of camps, each with its own specific set of challenges, was immense. From the arid plains of Texas to the humid swamps of Louisiana, the physical conditions varied drastically, yet the underlying philosophy remained consistent. The aroma of institutional disinfectant might have been a common thread, but so too was the underlying effort to treat prisoners not solely as enemies, but as potential sources of information and future agents of influence. This approach was far from perfect, encountering resistance from some hardline prisoners and skepticism from certain American personnel. Yet it persisted, driven by a strategic imperative. What were the tangible outcomes of this grand experiment in soft power during total war? The tangible outcomes, it turned out, were multifaceted, weaving together the threads of human experience with strategic objectives. Beyond the structured classrooms and the subtle probes of interrogation, the very fabric of daily life within these camps began to adapt, reflecting a complex blend of control and unexpected freedom. In Camp Ruston, Louisiana, by late 1945, the sounds of German folk songs sometimes drifted from barracks, accompanying the rhythmic hum of sewing machines. Prisoners, under careful supervision, were permitted to organize small theater groups, craft workshops, and even a camp newspaper, Die Brücke, the bridge, printed on rough, recycled paper. This wasn't merely a distraction, it was a deliberate policy. Major Clara Thompson, a Women's Army Corps officer assigned to POW administration, noted in her August 1945 report from Ruston, providing avenues for self-expression and structured activity significantly reduced disciplinary incidents and fostered a more cooperative atmosphere. The rationale was clear. Engaged minds were less prone to radicalization and more open to subtle influence. These activities also served as informal intelligence conduits. Guards and civilian staff observing interactions, noting who led discussions, who remained isolated, and who eagerly participated, gleaned valuable insights into the prisoners' evolving attitudes. A seemingly innocent conversation during a gardening session, the feel of damp soil clinging to their hands, might reveal more about morale than any direct question. However, this softer approach wasn't without its internal battles. Hardline Nazi sympathizers within the camps often tried to intimidate those who showed interest in American culture or education, maintaining a rigid, hostile front. The smell of fear, though often masked, could still permeate the air when such internal conflicts arose. How did the American authorities navigate these internal ideological skirmishes, and what impact did these varied responses have on the ultimate success of their soft power strategy? The strategic calculation extended beyond the fences, subtly influencing the perceptions of the local American populace. Initially, the presence of enemy combatants, even female ones, elicited a mixture of hostility, suspicion, and sometimes outright fear. Local newspapers, like the Hearn Weekly Democrat in Texas, initially carried headlines reflecting a stern, unyielding stance. Yet, as the war progressed, and prisoners were sometimes allowed to work on local farms or in non-critical service roles, a curious shift began. The sight of German women, clad in their drab uniforms but performing tasks with diligence, their faces often etched with weariness rather than malice, started to humanize the enemy. Mrs. Agnes Miller, a farm owner near Camp Hearn, recounted in a 1972 oral history interview how a group of German women helped her harvest her pumpkin crop in the autumn of 1945. They worked hard, she remembered, and they were just girls really far from home. One of them even smiled when I offered her a piece of pie. That simple, sweet taste of pumpkin pie, shared across enemy lines, became a small, unexpected bridge. These interactions, however limited, chipped away at the monolithic image of the enemy. The local townsfolk, accustomed to propaganda posters depicting Germans as faceless aggressors, now saw individual women, some barely out of their teens, whose stories, though unspoken, hinted at their own suffering. The crisp autumn wind carried the whispers of these encounters through the small towns, slowly altering the perception of the war itself. If these subtle shifts in human understanding, even amidst the brutality of war, resonate with you, and if you find value in exploring these complex layers of history, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us know that these stories are reaching those who appreciate a deeper look. The War Department, through internal reports and observations from camp commanders, recognized the potential of these civilian interactions. While strict security protocols remained, policies were subtly adjusted to allow for more controlled engagement, understanding that positive perceptions from the local community could reinforce their broader strategy. Telegrams from the Provost Marshal General's office in Washington, D.C., dated spring 1945, began to include recommendations for community outreach, albeit carefully managed. This wasn't just about public relations. It was about demonstrating a contrast to the brutal narratives of total war, both for the prisoners and for the American public. But how did this deliberate cultivation of a human face ultimately translate into the critical intelligence the U.S. military so desperately sought? And what kind of information could a piece of pumpkin pie truly unlock? The information wasn't always a direct confession extracted under duress. Instead, it often seeped out through the cracks of a carefully constructed environment, one where the unexpected slice of pumpkin pie played its subtle, subversive role. Dr. Carl Junger, a German-American psychologist attached to the Military Intelligence Service in 1944, theorized that a softened front leads to a softened interior. His reports, now declassified, detail how the emotional dissonance created by humane treatment, the contrast between propaganda and reality, could induce a state of psychological vulnerability, making prisoners more amenable to revealing information. The sterile white walls of an interrogation room, often perceived as places of torment, sometimes became spaces of quiet conversation, where the scent of stale cigarette smoke mingled with the faint, sweet memory of an unexpected dessert. It wasn't always high-level military secrets that emerged. More often, it was the texture of everyday life, the names of local officials, the mood in a specific German town before the bombing raids, or the whispered doubts about the regime's ultimate victory. These seemingly innocuous details, when painstakingly compiled by intelligence analysts like Lieutenant Evelyn Reed, a cryptographer working at Fort Hunt, Virginia, formed a mosaic. Her team, sifting through thousands of coded messages and prisoner debriefs in late 1944, understood that small pieces of information, like scattered autumn leaves, could reveal the prevailing winds of an entire forest. The subtle nuances of a conversation, the way a prisoner described the rationing in her hometown, or her anxieties about family, could provide invaluable insights into civilian morale and the effectiveness of Allied bombing campaigns. The faint clatter of her typewriter keys echoed in the quiet room as she pieced together these fragments. But did the prisoners themselves remain oblivious to this calculated approach? Did they simply accept the unexpected comforts as genuine kindness? Or did a deeper suspicion linger beneath the surface of their gratitude? Within the barbed wire enclosures, a silent ideological battle often raged. Hardline Nazi loyalists, fiercely committed to the Third Reich, viewed any acceptance of American kindness as a betrayal. They often formed clandestine groups, their whispers carrying the chilling weight of intimidation, their eyes darting nervously in the dimly lit barracks at night. These groups attempted to enforce strict adherence to Nazi ideology, often ostracizing or even threatening those who embraced the educational programs or showed appreciation for their captors. A worn, faded swastika, carved crudely into a mess hall table, discovered and quickly removed by guards in Camp Hearn in early 1945, served as a stark reminder of this persistent resistance. American camp commanders, like Colonel Thomas Vance, no relation to Captain Eleanor Vance, were acutely aware of these internal dynamics. His daily log entries from Camp Clinton, Mississippi, in March 1945, describe efforts to identify and isolate the most ardent ideologues, often moving them to separate compounds to prevent them from undermining the broader strategy. The goal was not to eliminate dissent entirely, but to manage its influence, allowing the soft power approach to work on the majority. The heavy wooden doors of the isolation barrack, painted a stark institutional green, would often creak shut, sealing off these pockets of resistance. This selective separation was a delicate balancing act, a recognition that brute force alone would not achieve the desired intelligence or influence. The internal struggles within the camps were themselves a rich source of intelligence. Reports from American guards observing the social dynamics, the subtle hierarchies, and the conflicts among the prisoners provided insights into the persistence of Nazi ideology and the effectiveness of counter-propaganda efforts. Private First Class Sarah Miller, a guard at Camp Kennedy, Texas, noted in her weekly report of June 1945 how the silent treatment was often imposed on women seen speaking too freely with American staff or showing too much interest in English lessons. These observations, compiled into psychological profiles, helped intelligence officers understand the resilience of the indoctrination and where to focus their efforts. The quiet rustle of paper as these reports were filed away in steel cabinets, each sheet a fragment of a human story, contributed to a broader, more nuanced understanding of the enemy mind. This constant vigilance, combined with the soft power approach, created a unique environment for information gathering. The long-term impact of this nuanced approach extended far beyond the immediate intelligence gains. The hope was that these women, upon their eventual repatriation to a shattered Germany, would carry with them not just memories of defeat, but also a seed of a different understanding of America. Dr. Margareta Mueller, a post-war sociologist who interviewed hundreds of returning German POWs for a 1950 study commissioned by the Allied Control Council, observed that many female prisoners, particularly those exposed to educational and cultural programs, expressed a profound disillusionment with Nazi narratives. The sharp taste of defeat in their mouths was often accompanied by the lingering, unexpected sweetness of a memory, like that pumpkin pie. How deeply did these seeds of disillusionment take root in the ravaged landscape of post-war Germany? And what did these women truly carry back with them across the Atlantic, beyond their personal belongings? The journey home, for many of these women, mirrored their initial brutal transport in its physical discomfort, yet it was imbued with a different kind of dread. The troop transports that ferried them back across the Atlantic in late 1945 were still crowded. The salt spray still bit at their faces on deck, and the rhythmic thrum of the engines beneath their feet was a constant companion. But now, the silence in the cargo holds was often punctuated by hushed conversations about what awaited them in Germany. The relative order and provision of the American camps, however austere, had become a strange, temporary normalcy. Now they faced the unknown chaos of a nation in ruins. Dr. Klaus Richter, a post-war resettlement expert for the Allied Control Council, noted in his 1947 report on repatriated personnel that the psychological preparation for return was often insufficient, leaving individuals to confront devastation with memories of unexpected comfort. The first sight of Germany, for many, was a landscape of unimaginable destruction. The air, instead of the clean American crispness, was thick with the acrid smell of burnt timbers and damp concrete dust. Buildings stood like hollowed-out teeth against the gray sky, gaping wounds in the open fabric. Liesl Schmidt, whose diary chronicled her initial terror, now described her return to Hamburg in December 1945. The city was a ghost, where my home stood, only rubble. The cold wind howled through empty frames, and I remembered the warm mess hall, the pumpkin pie, and it felt like a dream, a betrayal. This stark contrast, the memory of a slice of unexpected sweetness in an enemy camp, versus the bitter reality of their homeland, created a profound internal dissonance that many struggled to reconcile. How could their personal experiences of American kindness align with the official narrative of total war and Allied aggression? Reintegrating into a shattered society presented its own unique set of challenges. Families, if they had survived, were often displaced, traumatized, or suspicious. Women who had been prisoners of war, especially those who had spent time in American camps, sometimes faced a subtle but pervasive stigma. The worn leather of their single suitcase, often containing little more than a few personal effects and perhaps a carefully preserved English textbook, was a symbol of their ambiguous past. Professor Helmut Fischer, a historian at the University of Bonn, specializing in post-war German society, describes this period as one of moral ambiguity and quiet judgment. He cites anecdotal evidence from interviews conducted in the early 1950s, where returning female POWs struggled to explain their experiences, often simplifying or omitting details of their treatment to avoid accusations of collaboration or disloyalty. The official German narrative, still reeling from defeat, had little room for tales of American generosity. The Allied occupation forces, while providing aid, were still viewed by many as conquerors. For these women, the small acts of humanity they had encountered in the camps, the opportunity to learn, the access to medical care, even the simple unexpected dessert, became private memories, often too complex or too dangerous to share openly. These memories, however, continued to shape their perspectives. The feel of a smooth, clean sheet in an American barrack, a stark contrast to the damp, rough blankets of their ravaged homes, lingered in their minds. It wasn't just about physical comfort. It was about the profound psychological impact of being treated with a degree of respect by the very enemy they had been taught to despise. This internal conflict, this quiet struggle to reconcile two vastly different realities, was a critical, if often unrecorded, consequence of the American soft power strategy. The seeds of disillusionment with Nazi ideology, sown by the contrasting experiences in the camps, began to sprout amidst the rubble. They had seen a side of America that propaganda had vehemently denied. They had been offered education, not just indoctrination. They had tasted pumpkin pie, not just the bitter dust of defeat. But how did these deeply personal, often unspoken transformations ultimately contribute to the broader rebuilding of Germany? And what specific evidence solidified the American military's belief in this audacious, paradoxical strategy? The U.S. military's belief in this audacious strategy was indeed solidified, not by immediate, dramatic intelligence coups, but by the cumulative weight of post-repatriation intelligence reports and long-term sociological studies. Lieutenant General Raymond S. McLean, a key figure in post-war occupation, referenced these findings in a 1948 address to the War College, highlighting the measurable erosion of ideological fanaticism among POWs who experienced humane treatment. The subtle shift in perspective, the willingness to engage with democratic ideas, was not a universal outcome, but it was significant enough to be documented as a successful application of soft power. These women, returning to a devastated nation, became quiet, often unwitting, agents of a different narrative. They might not have openly praised America, but their personal experiences, the memory of a clean blanket, the access to a book, or a shared slice of pie, served as an internal counterpoint to years of propaganda. The faint smell of fresh pine, a simple detail from the barracks, had become a subtle symbol of a different reality. So, the brutal logistics of wartime transport, the sheer necessity of moving thousands across continents, often did involve harsh treatment, a consequence of total war's exigencies. Yet, The deliberate, calculated introduction of small human kindnesses, the education, the medical care, and yes, the pumpkin pie, was never an act of naive compassion. It was a strategic investment. The paradox resolves itself in the understanding that conflict, even total war, is fought on multiple fronts: battlefields, propaganda, and the human mind. The brutal dragging was the grim cost of war. The pumpkin pie was a carefully placed psychological wedge. Their return to Germany, a land scarred by war, was a testament to survival but also to a subtle internal transformation. They carried not just the weight of defeat, but the quiet, persistent echo of an unexpected kindness that challenged everything they thought they knew. What untold stories from wartime do you believe are still waiting to be uncovered, lying beneath the surface of official narratives? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're curious to explore more hidden histories and nuanced perspectives, make sure to subscribe to Whispers from WW2 for our next investigation.